All right, I think that's probably about it. Macy, if you want to show the poll results.
Yeah, a few more people trickling with results. Sorry. All right, here we go.
All right. So Macy will share that and we will move on. In our next couple of sessions, just to let you know before we get started, on July 19th, we will be addressing Rep Payee. And on September 19th, we'll have a session on abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So thank you for joining us. Our speakers today are Anna Maria Connor with Disability Rights South Carolina and Aaron Hare from the South Carolina Institute of Public Health. And we'll be addressing Olmstead 101, home and community-based services. And I will let you guys get started.
Good afternoon. This is Anna Maria Connor from Disability Rights South Carolina. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes up front just explaining to you guys who DRSC is, what we do, and that is how we short-term refer to ourselves, disability rights. But we're basically a private nonprofit that provides free legal services to people with disabilities. It's a statewide organization, and we are the federally mandated protection and advocacy system for the state of South Carolina, which means there are federal laws that require us to exist and require that we do certain things. The first thing is that we be independent of all agencies that provide treatment or other services to people with disabilities. And our basic mission is to protect and advance the legal and civil human rights of people with disabilities, which means we address abuse and neglect, particularly in facilities, and particularly concerning restraint or seclusion, but it's not limited to facilities. It's not limited to restraint and seclusion, but we always have to prioritize abuse and neglect allegations in facilities and prioritize abuse and neglect allegations that may involve restraint or seclusion. We were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy for People with Disabilities. We've been in existence since about 1977. Next slide. So some of the other requirements for all P&As is that we provide free information and referral to people who contact us. So we may actually give you information. If your discussion is about sexual harassment, we can't address that. So we're going to send you over to people who can, like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission. We're also going to provide legal support in some situations. That could be explaining to you your rights, educating you on them. It could be helping you take what we've told you about your rights and advocating for yourself. It could be filing an administrative complaint or litigating. And it could be an individual case, and it could be a group case or what we call systemic litigation. We also provide education and outreach. Today is both education and outreach for us. So we do virtual platforms. We do actually face-to-face training for people who ask us, and all of this is free. Another really important part of what we do is our monitoring and investigations. Because we are the federally mandated P&A, we have access authority to monitor not only facilities, but all service providers where people with disabilities live or receive services. So we may go in and make a visit to Bryan Psychiatric Hospital. We may go into Whitman Regional Center. We could go into a CTH2 or another setting that provides either residential services or other services to people with disabilities to make sure that they know their rights, to make sure that they're free from abuse and neglect, and that they're receiving appropriate care and services. Now, another big part of what we do is tied into monitoring, and that's the investigations. We have authority to take complaints, both written, verbal, anonymous, not anonymous, about any allegation of abuse or neglect of a person with a disability in South Carolina. So we can investigate, but we do not do forensic investigations, which are the types of investigations that are done by law enforcement. What we try to do is make sure that appropriate reports are made to the right agencies. It could be the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, it could be DDSN, could be DHEC, but that appropriate allegations are made to the entities, the state entities first, and maybe the federal ones that address abuse and neglect, and then that they do their job. It could include law enforcement involvement, it may not. And the last thing that we do is public policy. Again, we do a lot of public policy work to try to advance and protect the rights of people with disabilities. So this report about Olmstead, the report and basically the teaching you guys about Olmstead and teaching legislators about Olmstead is public policy work. And sometimes we will be asked to weigh in on whether or not a certain bill or a change in a law will adversely affect people with disabilities. There could be an internal policy at Medicaid that we are asked to comment on. So that's all public policy work that we do. Next slide. And I'm going to introduce Erin Hare, who's going to talk to you about IMPH.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to DRSC for coordinating this. I am in the unique position of having started this project as an advocate with DRSC and finishing the project as the Associate Director of the South Carolina Institute of Medicine and Public Health. So I am uniquely attached to this project. But about my current organization, IMPH is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working collectively to inform policy to improve health and healthcare in South Carolina. Meaning we do a lot of projects that are meant to influence policy and basically make the policy process more fact-informed, more science-informed. Of particular interest to this group might be something like our current task force that we're working on to address the issue of social isolation in older adults. So we've convened a task force. That report will come out later this summer, and it will be full of recommendations about how to combat social isolation and the effects thereof in our older adults in the state. And so we can go to the next slide. A little bit about Olmstead and this project. The Olmstead decision is a US Supreme Court decision. It deals with the Americans with Disabilities Act and defining segregation as discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. This resulted in the community integration mandate of the ADA being upheld in the form of what we call the most integrated setting, meaning that services must be administered in the most integrated setting that's appropriate to that individual's care and needs at that point. And we can go to the next slide. We're going to be hurrying through this because we want to get to your questions, and we are going to be very, very respectful of the hour. So save your questions, put them in the chat, but we're going to kind of get through these slides. The idea of community integration is that programs and services have to be developed and administered in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of individuals with disabilities, meaning that an individual with disabilities can't be unnecessarily institutionalized because services aren't available in a more integrated setting, and that the state and other disinterested parties are not the ones that are to be making those decisions on behalf of people with disabilities. It should be the person with the disability and their doctor, their care team that make decisions about the level of integration into the community that they're going to be receiving. We can go to the next slide. So a little bit about this project. It was a collaboration between DRSC and the Institute of Medicine and Public Health, who kind of has a lot of practice in writing these kinds of reports and the methodology therein. This identified barriers in South Carolina to this kind of concept of community integration and administration of home and community-based services. A little bit about the methodology. IMPH and DRSC together conducted interviews of many people from the community. We had a lot of stakeholders. We interviewed folks who are providers. We interviewed people who work at state agencies and are administering these services. And most importantly, we interviewed people with disabilities and their families that would be receiving, should have been receiving those services, are receiving those services, have suffered under a lack of those services. And that's how we identified these barriers. And of course, there were a lot of common threads in that that came out of those interviews. After identifying the barriers to community integration, we wrote together, we wrote recommendations to address those barriers and reduce the barriers for people to receive home and community-based services. And then it asked South Carolina to commit to an Olmstead plan, which is a detailed outlining of how those services are going to be administered in the community, how people are going to have access to them, and how we are going to reduce the instances of people being institutionalized and in facilities that they don't want to be in. And so there is a link to that Olmstead report. I believe that's on DRSC's website. You can find it on our website as well. It's very, very available. And that should be in fully accessible format on both websites. So we can move to the next slide. Some of the barriers that we identified to community integration and to meaningful provision of home and community-based services in the state. Obviously, there are many, but these are kind of the common threads that we found when we were talking to providers, to administrators, to the state agencies, and to people who were receiving those services or waiting to receive those services. First is waiting lists for Medicaid waivers. We, like almost every state, have long waiting lists for Medicaid waivers. And that means that people with disabilities are waiting, in some cases, many, many years to receive the kind of specialized services that they need to address their health care and their conditions and their activities of daily life. We also are experiencing a healthcare workforce crisis. That has certainly been a big ticket item in the news, that we have dwindling personnel essentially to provide these services for people who need them. And that's when we get into the situations that if people are lucky enough to be approved for Medicaid waiver services, then there sometimes simply aren't providers for those services up to the level that they've been approved for. There is a lack in this state and most states of integrated competitive employment opportunities for people with disabilities. So one of the barriers to true community integration in the state is that we don't support people with disabilities when they are seeking jobs, and we don't make meaningful opportunities available and accessible to them. Another barrier, of course, that we see is housing. Accessible housing is rare. Accessible, affordable housing is even more rare in this state. And now, as we see rents exploding, that is even more of a barrier. So we always say, when we move somebody out of an institution or a residential setting that they don't desire, where are we going to move them to? We've got to have someplace that they go. So this report identifies that as a barrier and identifies some opportunities to address that. Transportation is another huge barrier to meaningful home and community-based service provision in the state. We obviously know that people with disabilities are less likely to be able to utilize public transportation. Even the limited resources that we have in the state are less likely to be able to drive themselves. And this is kind of the one that affects all of the others. If you are not able to get to your job, if you are not able to get to your appointments, your home and community-based service appointments, that's a huge barrier, and then it makes people more susceptible to moving into an institution. Access to assistive technology is a huge barrier. We have in the state a lot of programs that offer these services to folks, and they're not being taken advantage of, or people don't know what they are owed or what they can ask for if they are in a university setting, if they are in a public school setting, if they're on the job, in terms of assistive technology that can help them maintain. Another barrier is care coordination of services. Many times clients of DRSC and people with disabilities are entitled to a number of services, and the coordination is not there. And so people kind of suffer through administrative delays because we're not sure what services they're getting from one agency or the other. We can go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Anna Marie, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of the individual integration issues and how DRSC can kind of help you if you're seeking some of these services.
Thank you, Erin. You know, I want to say that running through those barriers, you guys who are listening may have identified with one or more of them, either on behalf of yourself, your family member, or your clients. And so, you know, DRSC has always worked to help both clients and families address problems, trying to overcome these barriers, trying to remove the barriers completely, for instance, and other things. So a lot of what, you know, you can call us about and ask us about, ask if we can even help you, is any of those barriers that you saw and other things that you can think of. Again, basic information referral is a service that we provide to everybody who contacts us. So one of the most important things that we always have to talk about is knowing your rights. That's one of the basics of community integration. First of all, you can't protect yourself from abuse or neglect unless you know that you have the right to be free from abuse or neglect. And one of the ways that you access community integration is to know your rights, to know who you talk to about abuse and neglect, but to also know who you talk to and what you can say, what you can ask when you talk to your service coordinator or when you talk to your staff, whether in a facility or out of a facility. So knowing and protecting your rights is a basic community integration for our clients and for us at DRSC. So we're always going to do whatever we can to educate clients, family members, and staff about the basic human, civil, and legal rights of individuals with disabilities. So any call or question about a right is always something you can contact DRSC about. Another important issue that ties into this is independent decision-making. Who has the right to make the decision about what's going to happen or be done for or to the person with a disability? Does the person retain the right? Do they have a guardian? Do they have a power of attorney that they have signed? Do they have the ability to make any of these independent decisions at all? So knowing and understanding what independent decision-making is and that it's crucial to protect that as much as possible for people with disabilities is very important. And of course, the more that you foster independent decision-making, the more this person can be taught and they can understand that, again, they have the right to be free from abuse and neglect, and they have the right to call somebody or ask somebody else to contact and report abuse and neglect that they may be suffering or that may be occurring to somebody else that they know. So again, an independent decision-making and knowing what that is, fostering it, is something that's basic to DRSC and is a basic important thing for all people with disabilities. So we encourage everybody to foster independent decision-making as much as possible, to try to understand it and to ask questions about it as much as possible. Another basic issue for community integration is choice of services. Do you need to be in a facility, and do you want to be there? Those are two fundamental things. First of all, you should never go into a facility if you don't need the care that's in the facility. Nobody should be shoved into a nursing home or forced into a hospital if they don't need those services, right? But the second part of it is, let's say that you're in a nursing home and you want to come out of that nursing home. Do you have the choice to do that? Today in our country, you're supposed to have the choice to leave the nursing home and live at home if you can do that. And later on, we'll talk about some of the services and ways that you might be able to do it. But again, choosing where to receive services and what services to receive is a fundamental issue or right under community integration. And that ties into the last bullet point here, self-directed service plans. Again, we're fostering as much independence as possible. So involving the person with the disability in making all of the decisions, discussing the plans, coming up with the ideas of what that person likes to do. What are their interests? What are their goals for the future? Not just, I am going to modify my behavior and be less aggressive, which we see in a lot of service plans, but it's also, what are the hopes and dreams of that client? Do they like music and they want to learn how to play an instrument? So if that's one of their goals, if that's one thing that they like, write that into their service plan and try to help them engage a provider that's going to provide that service to them and teach them how to play that instrument. Maybe it's not playing an instrument, maybe it's just listening to music or going to a concert or going to a movie, and a movie that's not in the facility or not in the home where they're living, but outside at a theater. Again, it's a self-directed plan. All plans, no matter whether you're in a facility or out in the community or transitioning back and forth, should be self-directed as much as possible. If the person, the individual client, lacks capacity or struggles sometimes with what they want to do or verbalizing or otherwise expressing what they want to do, that's where pulling in family members, friends, staff members, people that the individual is comfortable with and also that they know or that may have their best interests at heart can come in and help them develop those plans. Again, starting with as much self-direction as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, what are your rights? You have the right to make independent decisions, what we just talked about. You have the right to have equal access to services. So if you want to get services in the facility, then you should be able to get that as long as you qualify, as long as you need that level of care, and it's the type of facility that you should be in. For instance, if you are a person with intellectual disabilities, but the facility that you're asking about is a facility that is for people with mental illness, and you don't have a mental illness, you don't have the right to that facility, and you may not want to go there. But again, equal access to services. So if you want to have services in the community rather than being in the facility, you should have the right to get those services in the community and get the same quality of services and the same amount that you can show you need. All right, you have the right to be free from discrimination. So you should not be denied a good or service. You should not be denied the opportunity to participate in the community. whether it's going to that concert, whether it's going to the theater or going to church. You should not be denied those basic rights just because you have a disability, nor should your rights be limited. In other words, you might be able to get into one section of the park, but you can't get to the entire park when you go out because you're in a wheelchair. That's not good. If it's a public park, you should be able to access as much as possible. There should be reasonable accommodations that give you access to that park so that you enjoy that setting just like everybody else, the people without disabilities. And again, you have the right to be free from abuse and neglect. Nobody should ever neglect you medically, psychologically, physically. You should not be abused. There might be a restraint. You might be secluded. Somebody might decide that they are going to isolate you in your home or isolate you in part of a facility and not let you out. That seclusion could be detrimental, it could be unfair, and it could be abusive and neglectful. So you have the right to be free from that and to question whether or not those things are appropriate. And lastly, you have the right to live in the community. And we don't just mean that we're going to take you out and plop you in a home somewhere out in the country or in a residential neighborhood, and then that's it. When we say live in the community, you have the right to be the community and to not just live there, but work there, play there. So again, do you want to go to church? Do you want to work? Do you want to go to the theater? Do you want to play? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to be in a garden club? All the things, the choices that we make every day in the community settings that we all live in are things that you have the right to think about and to decide if you want to engage in. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the independent decision-making again and the difference between what we call supported decision-making versus guardianship. Guardianship is actually a legal thing in this country. So you can't just get permission from me, for instance, to make decisions for me, and that's guardianship. No, that would be a power of attorney. Guardianship, you actually have to go to court, and the court decides that the person lacks the capacity, lacks the ability to understand and make certain decisions, and somebody else is going to do that. Another adult, or it could be a parent, two parents. It could be sometimes an entity, like we have a volunteer adult guardianship program here in South Carolina that helps people, adults who are vulnerable and who might need a guardian to help them get through some problems that they're going through in their lives. Those are guardianships, but the order comes from the court, and it appoints one or more specific people to make decisions for the person who does not have the ability to make their own decisions. And in this state, we have been working long and hard to make sure that we protect the individual decisions of the person and the right to make those decisions as much as possible. So all guardianship orders nowadays are supposed to start from the idea that we're going to protect as many of the decisions that the person can make, keep those rights in the person as much as possible. For instance, do they want to vote? And do they have the capacity to vote? That may be a basic decision that they keep. They might lose other authority to make decisions, handling money, for instance. They may not understand, maybe too complicated for them because they've got a trust or something. And so somebody comes in and says, I want to handle the money for this person, but the person can understand and make decisions about voting and wants to retain that right. So the court may rule, I'm going to give Anna Maria the right to make decisions over here about handling money for Aaron, but Aaron is going to retain the right to vote. So what is supported decision-making, and why do we think that's necessary when we've already got an ability to some extent to limit guardianships? Well, supported decision-making is a practical and a legal concept that we at DRSC have been working on with other partners for several years. Because if you think about it, none of us really goes through life without getting advice, help, and counsel from other people. I know when I bought my first car, when I bought my first home, when I was going to school, I was trying to figure out if I was going to go to college and where I was going to go. A lot of things that we do in our day-to-day lives, we talk to friends and family and colleagues and get advice and counsel to help us make that decision. That, frankly, is supported decision making. So what we are asking everyone to do is to give that same right to get counsel, advice, and support from friends and colleagues and family members to people with disabilities. Understand that just because you want to get help and advice from somebody, it doesn't mean you don't have the ability to make the decision. It just means that you're trying to make the best decision possible. So supported decision-making is a way of doing that. And we actually have a whole other project that we worked on with Able South Carolina and other partners several years ago that came up with agreements that you can enter into. You can decide, okay, I want to talk to my dad about buying a car because he knows about cars. But if I'm talking about some social issue, like do I want to go to this concert or do I want to save up and go on this trip? Maybe I want to talk to Erin about that because Erin travels more than my dad and she may have better advice. So I can have an agreement that says, when it's purchasing a car, I'm going to go consult with dad. But when it's purchasing a trip or planning a trip to Europe, I'm going to go talk to Erin. And that's a supported decision-making agreement with each of them. All right, so that's an alternative to guardianship and another way to go. Power of attorney is part of supported decision-making. It's different from guardianship. A power of attorney is a document that somebody with capacity, an adult who can understand what they're doing, it's a document that we use to give authority to somebody else to make decisions for us when we think it might be necessary. It could be that you are going on that trip and part of that trip involves some danger. And so you want to have a power of attorney that says, if I get in an accident, Erin's going to be able to make decisions about my medical care, or she's going to handle my finances and take care of my money until I am aware again and can make those decisions for myself. So that's a power of attorney, and it's somebody who voluntarily says, I'm giving you some authority to make decisions on my behalf. Powers of attorney, though, because you're giving that authority away, you still retain the basic authority. The power of attorney and the person who has it can't trump your decision. They can't say, Anna Maria, I've got your POA, that's what we call them, and I'm going to override your decision if I have all the ability. I'm not in an accident, I'm just me. They can't say that their decision rules over mine. I still retain the authority. It's still my authority. I just set this power of attorney in place and this person in place to help me if it becomes necessary. So if I decide later on that I don't want to talk to Erin, I don't want to have her be the power of attorney for handling my finances, I can take that back and I can destroy that. Or I can just say, you no longer have my power of attorney, so you can't handle my money for me. So it's a voluntary gift of authority that can be withdrawn, or it's a voluntary sharing of authority that can be taken back by the person who retains the authority. You can have those for medical decisions, you can have those for finances and property and money, and you can combine them into one long, complicated document. But again, that's another alternative to taking all the authority away and instituting guardianship. Representative payees are something that actually exists in the Social Security system, and they are basically people who are given the authority to step in to help handle the Social Security benefits of people in this country. And so it concerns handling the money and making sure that the money is used for the person, the money is spent appropriately, that it's recorded and tracked. And that again, if you are paying for services, the services actually exist and the services are quality services. They're actually doing good health care and so forth. And the person is free from abuse and neglect. But the main point of the rep payee is, are you handling that Social Security money for somebody else? Are you tracking it? Do you have it separated out from your own banking accounts and things like that? And it's all about Social Security benefits, but it is another form of help for making and handling decisions. Next slide. Okay, choice of services. Again, do you want to live in the community or do you want to live in a facility? Do you want to you move from one place to another? Maybe you're in the community, but your caregiver, who's your mom, is going to go in for surgery. So you want to actually have respite care while your mom is in surgery and recovering from surgery. So maybe it's a temporary thing, but deciding where you want to live and where you want to get services, and then deciding what services you want, is something that's basic for community integration. Medicaid and home and community-based services waivers are ways that people can get services in the community so they have a choice. This is a part of the Medicaid program in South Carolina. We have, I think, 7 of these in South Carolina addressing different populations. So there's the intellectual disability and related disability waiver, there's the head and spinal cord injury waiver, and some others. But the whole purpose of these waivers is so that people who have the highest needs in these programs that they might need nursing home care, or they might need an intermediate care facility for people with intellectual disabilities, but they actually have a choice once they meet that level of care, and they can say, okay, I want to go into that nursing home, or I want to go into that ICF, or I want to avoid going in that facility. I prefer to stay at home with my parents. I prefer to live in my private apartment or wherever it is, and receive those services in the community. And so these waivers give individuals and their family members the choice of where to receive services. That's the purpose of the waivers. All the money has to be spent in the community, providing community services. Another choice of service is employment. The South Carolina Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, the Commission for the Blind, are 2 entities that can help with employment. DDSN still helps with employment. But again, it's encouraging people to know that they can choose to be employed. They can choose to be employed in a community rather than a non-community setting. And do they have appropriate training and support to get to their goal of being employed? Next slide, please. Okay, self-directed service plans. Again, the individual directs the choices. The individual's goals, needs are identified, and they invite people that they want to help develop the plan and to then make the plan happen. The case manager is usually the best person facilitating this, and they should always encourage the self-directed service plans as much as possible. And they should also help you not only identify what you want to talk about, who you want to invite to the meeting, but also help identify services and providers who might provide those services. So the case manager is crucial, and they often do the best job possible, and they have a lot to do. So it doesn't help, it doesn't hurt rather if you also gain knowledge, and if you can gain knowledge and then ask good questions, the service coordinator can give you answers to those questions and doesn't have to teach you the basics. So I'm not saying don't learn anything, but I'm saying the case manager, they work very, very hard to make sure they understand who you are and what you need, and then try to link you up with goods and services and give you meaningful choice. Next slide. So DRSC can help with rights training and addressing various violations of those rights. We've already talked about whether or not you get the right to make your own decisions, but also whether or not you know about Medicaid waivers. And have you applied for a waiver? Are you on a waiting list? Service issues like those Medicaid home community-based services. If you're denied a specific service or you're denied access to a waiver completely, that may be a Medicaid appeal that we might be able to help you with. Our client assistance program, the CAP, is another part of DRSC, and those are issues with vocational rehabilitation. So that's a completely separate part of what we do. Education, abuse, neglect, and monitoring are all issues that we can help you with. Access issues in the community could be effective communication. It could be that you were not allowed to take your service dog in when you went into a store. So call DRSC and ask us about that. Next slide. So when should you call? You should call if you have a question. You should call or email or contact us. You can look at our fact sheets. You can look at our website and see many different things. But if you have a question or you have a problem or you want to know who to call, you can contact us. You should definitely contact us if you believe you or somebody else with a disability has been abused or neglected, and make sure you know where to report. You can report to us. You can also, and you should report to all the other entities that deal with the person that you're trying to protect, or that address the facility or the programming that is providing services to that person. If you believe you've been unfairly denied a service or your services have been reduced or changed, maybe you didn't get notice of the change, then give us a call and ask us what should have happened in that instance. Next slide. Okay, so this is my contact information, and I think we probably have contact information for Erin. All
right, thank you, Anna Maria, and thank you, Erin. We're sorry we could not get to all of your questions, but please don't hesitate to contact us directly. That is exactly what we are here for, and we have lots of staff ready to help you. Thank you for your time today. We hope this helped some. We will have this on YouTube hopefully by next week, and you can share it with your friends if anyone wasn't able to get on. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.